Hello, everyone, and welcome to State of Exile, episode 51, with the GGG Developer Special, Chris Wilson. Thanks again, Chris, for coming on the show. I know Monday mornings are busy with those early meetings, so I appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's great to be here.
All right, so I want to start things off with, you have a rather dapper picture today. We're used to seeing the one with you having hair, but today you just had to go above and beyond with this picture. Thank you for providing that.
That's okay. It's been a while since I shaved the head for the community, so I just wanted to show it's still like that. Secretly, I like being bald. It's fine.
I know that feel all too well. All right, so today we have a lot to talk about, guys. We're going to be discussing with Chris the Perandus economy, the impacts that it has, and if it's going to be here forever. The trading dilemma, whether about the premium stash tabs, the new currency tab. We're going to be discussing everything Ascendancy, what classes are underpowered, overpowered, and the Labyrinth, specifically low-life CI and hybrid builds. And then we're going to discuss some community-driven events such as Soul Self-Found and some other questions like PvP, Leo, things like that that we haven't really touched up on in about a year. So let's kick things off, Chris. Thank you again for coming on the show. Perandus economy has had a lot of talk about it. It's been one of the first league where we have leveling uniques readily available for us, but the economy's been pretty watered down with them. What kind of impact has Perandus had, and is it here to stay?
So the design of Perandus definitely involved us saying that we wanted to see what happens if we have leveling uniques available. We're trying different things with each challenge league because we know if we're producing 4 challenge leagues a year for the next decade or whatever, we have to release 40 of these, and we want to see what it's like if there's one that has a high availability of items. And that's not a promise that there are going to be available items in the future necessarily, but we want to see how it affects player retention, whether people get further in the game, and so on.
It's a good testing ground for you guys, isn't it, to be able to kind of see how you want to progress the game in the future?
Yeah, it's really good. The only concern, of course, is the player expectations thing. Where if we did one league where there's readily available items, and another league which is entirely about difficulty, for example, with no available items, that's quite that's taking someone out of hot water and putting them in cold water straight away. So we have to be careful with this. And we wanted Perandus to be quite generous, and it's achieved that for sure. It's actually probably slightly more generous than we intended. Players are certainly more efficient at getting coins. We run the math of, okay, well, how many coins are they going to get in an hour? What's a pretty extreme example? And then they exceed that because, our players are pretty extreme. But the rate of unique acquisition is within the bounds that we've discussed. And so I would say that a lot of this economic impact has been planned, but it's certainly being labeled as an experiment.
Yeah, okay. So are you guys concerned about the player expectations then, given that it is a pretty different to the core game?
We're somewhat concerned, and that's why the next Challenge League has some gifty elements to it, so it's not completely going back to, regular challenge. It's still
no cold turkey.
Yeah, for sure. The thing is, giftiness is fun, right? People love risk and they love reward, so we're just making sure that the ratios are appropriate. In Perandus, there are kind of 3 levels of reward. For starters, you get items from the monsters near the chests, and then you get the coins that you could either trade for wealth or spend later, and finally you can find bro deals at Kadero himself. So there's kind of 3 layers of where you can get rewarded, and we feel that 1 or 2 strong layers may be better than having 3.
Okay. Now, is this something you guys are intending on keeping in the game forever, or is it going to come back?
At this stage, we're not going to be keeping Perandus when the league ends, but that could change. We reserve our rights to have a look to see how it's going at the time, and the way we've set it up involves so many different ways that leagues can be retained, right? They can be rolled into standard forever like Rogue Exiles were, they could be put on Zana, and we plan to rotate which leagues are on Zana. I'm sure at some stage in the future, Perandus will probably be available as a Zana mod where you can pay some low amount of currency to have the Perandus chest Sankadero spawn in the map that you're playing. It's possible we'll bring Perandus back in flashback events in the future, maybe even start turning on league modes and standard, a year down the track if we're looking for interesting events. So there are many ways we can bring this content back. So us removing it for the state of the economy or for the flavor of the game isn't a condemnation of the content. I love Talisman and think it's one of the best leagues myself. Could do with a bit of tweaking, of course, and that will be coming back at some form in the future, just not yet.
Okay, that's good to know. So speaking about this right now, Perandus League has the Varanastra Sword, which is an extremely awesome build-enabling unique. And last week we had the Rig Vault Curse unique. Now, when these leagues come out, when you design these new awesome uniques, do you guys think to yourself, we want this to be something that they can only take advantage of for 3 months, or is this something that you guys are, you're planning to make it more readily available to us in the future?
It's cool for build enabling uniques to be powerful and restricted because it means that there's arbitrary metagame shifts that occur depending on when they're available. And the other thing is, I was talking to the guys in the office about this, and I said, well, how do you feel about this community idea of having the build enabling uniques all be, in the main game, and we just do other ones as the league specific content? And they argued, build enabling uniques are the good uniques, honestly. If it enables a build, it's something you want and you're happy to have it. And we need league specific uniques to occasionally be good, otherwise people are going to complain that the uniques in that league are just trash. And you may as well be playing standard. So there are going to be some build enabling uniques that are available with the league content, and the availability of those will fluctuate depending on how available that content is in the game at the time.
How about just the idea of having the leagues being an early access to those, rather than them being like the only access to those?
We can probably do that with some of the items, especially if they feel like they have a great place in the game itself. I can't really spoil much future content, but let's just say that in the future there are more ways to get, league uniques. Like how in Perandus it's possible to buy a headhunter from Gadiro if you're very lucky and encounter one. We like the idea of having these as the chase uniques that are available with a bit of a chase.
Okay.
Actually, I really like that because Shadow and Dust is one of my favorite uniques in the game, and I haven't really had access to it because I play hardcore. It's a Rampage-only unique. And now they're 30 Chaos, 20 Chaos, and it's one of the best pair of gloves in the game. And as long as we could find a way to get it, every so often, I'm okay with it.
Right. It's very different than if we said, look, it only dropped X years ago. It's completely legacy. The only way to get it is to stock up on Exalts and trade for one in standard. You guys are screwed. You can't get it anymore. That's one extreme that we're certainly not going to. We bring this stuff back. You can get it through things like Gadiro. You can find them through Zana mods when they're available on Zana.
Awesome. That's the stuff we need because Rigvault's Curse, man. It was softcore only, and all of us hardcore guys 2 leagues in a row without it, and we're just craving it.
Yeah. Well, we've stopped doing that. We've officially, as of the most recent league, not put hardcore and standard specific uniques, and now it's available unilaterally between the two.
And in the future, you're planning on keeping it like this as well, I would assume.
Probably. Put it this way, it's cool to have different uniques in the leagues. It provides a reason to play one versus the other. We feel it's a very D2 thing to do, but there was community outcry about it, and we don't, want to live or die based on this one thing, so we've said, fine, we'll make it flat. It's technically less work for us to not have to make a special set of uniques per league.
We're like, well, okay, guys, we'll do less then.
Yeah. Well, we can put the work into other aspects of the league.
Yeah.
Of course, we can probably come up with more uniques overall, but it's less pressure having to come up with a really special one for both standard and hardcore.
Okay. I want to ask about player retention this league because have you guys noticed like a different set of stats this league that you could attribute maybe to the league, the actual league impacts like Perandus? So, better player retention, people playing more builds, like any interesting trends that you guys have noticed?
So players are typically going further than they normally do. We can look at a profile of a player and say, okay, look, this guy got to maps and then quit at tier 5 maps, or this guy built multiple, tier 10 map characters, or this guy didn't even get to maps. And we can have a look at this. And we find that with the availability of items, people are generally going a step or two further than they previously did. We're seeing people that dabbled in maps now becoming proficient. We're seeing people that, previously got to very high tier maps, making it most of the way to 100. We're seeing people who tried one build and then decided to take a break for the next season now re-rolling a new character because they've got item availability. And so this has certainly helped player retention. And interestingly, this league also had a very high number of players at the peak, which is something that we weren't expecting. I think the player stats here were 30% higher than my predictions, which is really good. Right now we have more players than the equivalent point in any Path of Exile expansion, with the one exception of when we had our massive release in 2013 with tons of Steam marketing and everything, and the game was new for the whole community.
That is crazy news. Wow. Yeah,
we certainly felt it on our end, yeah.
Absolutely. Normally by now you notice the player drop off, but still, 1 month later we were just cruising. And I'm happy about it. I can't wait to see what's to come. The last thing I want to bring about Perandus League before Ziggy takes off on his soapbox of trading. Do you feel the monsters are similar to Beyond? There's a lot of frustration. In the beginning, it's nice, it's refreshing, new monsters you haven't seen before. But over the course of time, it just becomes more of a chore, a hassle, and it really takes a toll on the player. Do you feel the Perandus monsters are similar to that?
We found that the Perandus monsters scale really strongly with other bonuses. So it's one of those cases where when they're magic, for example, they become a lot more deadly. And if they have bonuses from other monsters nearby or whatever, map mods, for example, We felt that removing Bloodlines helped a lot here because there was some really broken stuff going down with some of the Bloodlines mods. But at the end of the day, it's kind of meant to be a challenge league, right? We don't want it so that these are just free item boxes and there are some monsters that you do a token attempt at killing. You know, they're going to stand in the way, they're going to be challenging, and maybe they'll take a toll on some players. Having said that, we're constantly looking to improve the nature of these fights, and honestly, the Perandus monster fights here were thrown together relatively late in the league design. We had a bit of a re-roll with how that worked 1 week before it came out. So while the Kadiro stuff had months of tuning and so on, the Perandus fights themselves were somewhat of a last-minute attempt on our end because of late feedback that came in during QA. And we put a lot of effort into getting the Ascendancy stuff ready ages in advance, and Perandus was a bit of a push. So I suspect that if there are problems with the balance of the fights, it's mostly due to lack of development time on them. Thankfully, future leagues we have quite a long pipeline on, so we get them done earlier.
I feel like there's something that they share in common, like Beyond and some Perandus mobs, where they push the line of, there's different types of difficulty, right? There's like enjoyable challenge and then there's fatiguing challenge. And I feel like Beyond certainly pushed that in some areas because it was very constant. And then something about the Perandus mobs I'm noticing too, it can be quite fatiguing, especially like the bubble ones that it's not very clear exactly how that works mechanically. And those boxes take forever to kill sometimes. Like you're just killing them over and over again. You don't really know when it's going to end. Especially that can be particularly fatiguing. Have you guys kind of like thought about that at all?
The guys are constantly discussing it. I think they've made a call at the moment not to try to change those fights within this league, but I suspect before we bring it back in the future, we'll have to do a quick revamp and make sure that it's kept fresh. And, put it this way, we have to update it to take into account new skills and so on at the time anyway, so we may as well make sure that the fights are as good as they can be, because the state of our tech that we use to create these fights is constantly improving. Like if we went back and did something like Nemesis again now, it would be completely different and totally a lot better. So the next iteration of Perandus will probably have a lot of improvements.
Something I wanted to ask about the Perandus mobs, which really started getting me thinking here. You guys removed shotgunning a while ago, and the whole reason for this was, melee characters are being punished by being, shotgun. But if you put multi-proj on a map, think instances like the Perandus mobs with the torches, you get hit by all three still, the AoE overlapping of monsters. And Perandus League, it's even more so because you notice those mobs, when they even have any kind of buff, are insane. Do you guys plan on, adjusting any kind of AoE overlapping in the future so that we still don't get shotgunned?
I think that's a very valid point, and it's probably something that the guys missed when they were setting this up. So I'll have a chat with them when I get to the office today to make sure that they are aware that they created a shotgunning situation here with Perandus. But that's really good feedback there, and hopefully it's something that we can avoid in the future.
Oh, great. Thanks. So, Ziggy, you want to kick things off with trading?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever the topic of trading comes up, myself and I think a lot of community members take the position that trading is an integral part of Path of Exile, like that the game is balanced around it, that the optimal game experience for most people is going to be involving trading in some fashion. I'm curious about is that your position, like officially at GGG, that you guys designed Path of Exile with the intent of trading being a very core element to it, or is it more trying to push things in the direction of self-found and trading just being one option of how to play?
So items are a big part of Path of Exile, and at all times we try to keep it so that you can physically trade an item to someone else. Now there's an important distinction here because, put it this way, if it was a completely self-found game, like some other action RPGs that don't have trade at the moment, then while you can find an item that someone else is jealous of, there's no ability for you to give it to them if you wanted to. The ability here in Path of Exile that you've got the item and you could give it to them, but you're not going to do it, is an important part of having the wealth. It makes you better than the other player. And so it's very important to us that people can trade, that there is trading in the game. Having said that, there are many drawbacks to having fast and efficient trade in the game. When you're playing through the game, if you have the ability to instantly swap out some item that's not good for your character for one that is, you're seeing a lot more items than someone who isn't engaging with the trade system or does sporadic trading. And that means that the game is a ton easier, and so we have to make it harder, and then it's hard for the people who a lot harder for the people who aren't trading. So the easier we make trading, the bigger the gap between traders and non-traders in the game. And there are many people who don't really like to trade often. When we survey players, it may feel like everyone's trading, but honestly it's only a small portion of the player base because most people mindlessly continue to play the game without really engaging with the community or trading. They're the silent masses. And so if we say, okay, amazing trade tools, you could instantly get everything you want for your character, then it will certainly lead to those players having a bit of a rough experience, assuming we balance the game around this. And if we don't balance the game around this, then the power creep that we're seeing just continues at a faster rate. Having said that, there are trade improvements coming because it's a bit cumbersome at the moment. But this is the problem we have here, where we can't just trivialize the trading experience because it will be bad for a group of players who are currently not vocalizing that.
Okay. So speaking of like the gap that you mentioned between people that are trading and not trading, how do you guys feel about the new player trading experience, especially at the moment? So when someone brand new joins the game, how much do you guys expect those people to engage in trading, and how do you see them going about it? At what point in a life cycle does a new player engage in trading, and you guys expect that to happen?
So trading's actually disabled on new accounts until you hit level 25 for currency items and stuff. And this is an anti-botting measure where we feel that we can detect bots very easily by the time they hit level 25. It's plenty of time, honestly. So we basically say if you're a new player, you can't give currency or skill gems with quality or various other bits and pieces to other players. You can only get and receive random rare items that you find and so on. And this is something most people don't know about because they've had accounts going back years, or they hit 25 before they talk about trading. And that's indicative here because the typical behavior we see is that a player will just play through the game without really trying to trade, except occasionally they'll get an item from a friend or from a guildmate. You know, they'll receive some items every now and then, but they're not actually saving up currency and going out to create a build until they understand how builds work and what they want to be playing in the end game. You know, they'll make their characters that die off in the 40s before they actually look up a map guide and try to, make a character that uses Vortexic Rift, for example. So new player trading is typically getting some freebies in chat, and we currently actually disable trading entirely for new players, which is something the fact that people are mostly unaware of this shows how little trading those players are attempting to do.
Yeah, I suspect that trading only starts to become important at the 20-hour mark for most new people once they've played through normal. Like, I think a brand new player often, unless they're an experienced action RPG player, will spend quite a bit of time getting through normal and fiddling around a few different characters before they start engaging in trading. I certainly think that. I feel like there's that important point, though, where they then discover trading, and that is important to their retention in the game beyond that. Because I think that engaging in the community is what keeps people around for a longer period of time, rather than it just being something that they fiddle around on for 10, 20 hours and then don't come back to, which I imagine is pretty important for you guys, given the monetization model for the game, that they do then stick around. So how are you finding that transition from that first 10 to 20 hours of fiddling around in game self-found to going on to trading?
We typically find that people start by using trade chat quite a while before they engage with community tools. And trade chat is still pretty vibrant, right? It's a place you can get items. And this is good enough for many of these players. The thing is, upon engaging with the community and using trade chat, it's not hard to become aware of PoE.trade. And the experience of listing items there has certainly got a lot easier with the various indexing tools and so on, so that you don't need to download third-party software onto your computer to use this service. And the fact that there's a website there that you can just go to search for stuff, I mean, sure, it's slightly more hostile as a player experience than having it built into the game client itself, but it does mean that we're not telling people, you need to be doing this trading stuff at level 10, which is what it communicates by having that in the actual game client.
I think that trade chat definitely has its place, but that is the first new player trading experience. I think is a pretty rough transition, personally.
Put place in quotes there. Place. So something I wanted to talk about, Chris, with trading in specific. Last podcast we had a streamer. Her name is Cooter. She came on the show, and she started in Talisman, and she did not trade at all, pretty much in Talisman. And 10 chaos was a big deal to her. But once you guys implemented the premium stash, this person has never messed with acquisition, any of that. The amount of trade experience drastically went up. Now I'm starting to trade. It's more fun. Still a newer player. And I was kind of blown away by that because it took me about 2 weeks to really get into procurement back then. Now, the premium stash tab, as you know, it has to be purchased. Have you guys thought at all about implementing maybe one free premium stash tab or one free sell-only tab to a new player or new accounts once they achieve level 25?
So the reason why we haven't given out one for free, trivially so far, is the following scenario. So this is how we see it going down. We provide a free stash tab to everyone, and players say, great, I've got my free stash tab. And they, obviously use it, and everyone's happy. Except that a number of people are going to say, you know what, I'd love to have more than one of these. And what we'd like is for them to go and purchase it. But what we can see from previous behavior is they would say, you know what, I could trivially make a second account and throw my items to trade, maybe secondary items that trade less often, in the free stash tab on that account. And so they do so. And this continues, every time they've got stuff to trade, instead of paying the money, they could easily make another account and put stuff in there, which by itself is okay. There's a huge inconvenience with having to go between multiple accounts. So then someone realizes that they can ask the guy who maintains PoE.trade, hey, Ilya, why don't you make it so that all of my accounts are linked in some way, and then if someone makes an offer on one of my items that's in one of my alternate accounts, it goes through to my main account. Now suddenly all the convenience is there, and it's very easy for them to list stuff on 10 or 20 accounts. Now if Ilya says, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, guys, I'm not going to do that, then someone else will say, I can do that, and they'll make a competitor because it's all open and public, and that one will now be better than PoE.trade. And so due to competition, someone will do this. Now people have a ton of accounts with a ton of regular stash tabs, as you get 4, and there's really no need to buy stash tabs anymore, ditto character slots, and everyone's switching between multiple accounts all the time, and we just don't see this as a future that's particularly sustainable. Now, it may sound bad that we're talking about money here, but money pays for the server bills and pays for us to make content. Like, it would be great if we could honestly provide unlimited stash tabs for free, but this is the only thing in the game that has any functional utility that we sell. Cosmetics are great and all, but we don't make the revenue that pay-to-win games make, and so we have to be very careful to not accidentally sabotage our ability to pay development costs. So we're pretty careful with how we're doing this.
That is probably the best reason the community could have heard right there, because we're all like, why not? Okay, that makes sense.
I do think that's a pretty good reason. I think, though, that like Path of Exile's been held up for the longest time as being one of the best monetization models in the business, and I've always, we're always curious, like, you guys make it work because you've stayed that way. If that's not quite able to work, then I think that's pretty understandable. But my question is, even from you guys have even argued the point that one of the biggest counters to the idea of stash tabs being an in-game advantage is the fact that you could make extra accounts. So now premium tabs, though, that's that's a separate line for you guys, I guess?
I agree, it is pushing a line, and I dislike the slippery slope argument that some people make, because we aren't planning on continuing to push the slippery slope thing until we're doing all sorts of bad stuff. But at the moment, there are free trading tools that use regular tabs. All of the community stuff is still supported, and this thing where you can only trade if you have premium tabs pre-assumes that for some reason all the forum scraping stuff goes away and we're living in a different future, and we're not in that future yet. And this is obviously something we'll have to take into account if that future arrives. So
that's something you're planning on taking on if that does happen, right?
Well, in the discussion about these questions before, I was, it was made very clear to me to not promise anything here. But if we're in a future where the community scraping stuff doesn't work anymore, then we'll have to probably fix something. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean free tabs for everyone. It may mean we're adding an API for the forum scraping or something like that, or improving the free tools in some way. But we do want to make sure that there are good, strong options for people who haven't put any money in the game yet.
That's certainly reasonable. I guess my reason why I've been pushing the idea of I feel it would be better to tackle that eventuality or that potential future, because right now there was recently a poll done, I think, and 90% of the trades on PoE Trade are through premium stash tabs. So that to me is like a statistical showcase that 10% is going to probably get lower and lower and become less and less looked after, and to the point where development tools are just going to be like, it might not be really worth doing that, because forum scraping I know is very intensive. And at some point I see that is an eventuality that this old inefficient method be phased out. So I see that personally as an inevitability, and I feel that the issue for the game, or the risk for the game, is this idea that it will get a lot of negative publicity if, even for only a couple of days, the game gets this pay-to-win situation where you can only sell things using premium tabs. Because then our games gets a hold of it, the gaming websites get a hold of it, and they publish, articles on that. Path of Exile goes pay to win. And then if you guys fix it in a couple of days, that gets published too, but it gets less attention, because that's how these sorts of things always go.
Sure, I agree. It's something that we'll have to keep a very close eye on, and we'll try to come up with some contingencies. The thing is, the game being free, in many ways I wish the game wasn't free and that you just pay $10 to play it, because it would cut out all of the abuse case where people make 30 accounts and then do stupid things on them. And if it said, look, the $10 is going towards your trade tabs and that's just what the game costs, this is something we can't practically switch to at this stage. But I do feel that there's little value in us promoting the game to be free. That's a thing that worked as a marketing thing in 2010, but our target audience has $10. And I'm just worried that this, we're not, doing the things that RPGs do that are bad, in terms of selling progress and that kind of stuff. This is a case of a convenience feature. And it's good that the community is standing up and saying, this convenience feature could push a boundary somewhere. But from our point of view, we don't feel like it's unreasonable for engaged players to have spent $10 on the game, or $5 or $4 or whatever the tabs cost at some point in their gaming experience.
The way I see Path of Exile is, if someone's already playing the game, what's $5? Like, you go to a convenience store, you buy a Monster Energy drink that you don't need, or something else that's $5. And if you were to put that $10 on there, I could see where it would push people away. That's on Steam, they see $10, like, I don't really need it. I already bought a bunch of $10 games from Steam and I never play them. So I could see it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because honestly, $5 or $10 is nothing in the grand scheme of things, right?
I think in like any other MMO or any other game situation, this would not even be a discussion. But because Path of Exiles has such a good model, this is a discussion because it's like where it's seen as, I guess, a potential slight departure from what has been one of the most excellent models in the industry. And I think my primary issue is, I think it's totally reasonable, and I think that anyone that gets like 30, 40 hours in a free-to-play game that they thoroughly enjoy should be expected to spend, I think, like $20, $30 on the game to have, like, for convenience features. I think that's freaking reasonable, and that's so reasonable. But
it's great. It's great that they don't have to with the current model, which is a nice thing to keep.
Yeah,
obviously, we'd love it if people spent money
with third-party trading options and stuff like that at the moment. Exactly, it's totally true that they don't have to. So my my concerns more about like potential negative exposure for the game, and mostly the new trading experience, so the new player trading experience. Like, at what point do they start to engage, and how do they make that transition into engaging? What players are lost to the fact that they can't easily sell things in game?
Right. There are possibilities, like if we're adding free tabs for people, and if we identify that people aren't trading until they get to relatively high level and very experienced, then maybe you lock the free tab behind something. Like, for example, run your first map and then you get the tab. And this means that if someone wants to go and make 5 shill accounts, they would get each one of those to maps, which is a bit of a burden. It's easier to just pay the $4 for another tab than it is to have to rush the maps.
Like, I feel like you guys would still make tons of sales on the premium tabs just for the convenience factor alone, right? Like, people bought them because they were colored and you could rename them. I'm sure they would still be buying more, even if you were able to get one for free. I'm sure people would still be able to buy more.
Here's a story about the development of this. This is going to sound a bit shocking. So we intended from the beginning, like literally from the beginning, for trade tabs to be a separate purchase, right? Like, we're talking a long time ago. And it was implemented, honestly, when we did premium sash tabs, that there was a different type of tab, and you could actually upgrade from normal to premium, then premium to the trade ones, and so on. And this is just how it was going to be. And so we came to doing this, and we implemented trade tabs, and they cost extra money. Like, they weren't premium. Everyone would have to buy them. And then we thought, wait a second, this is going to be a shitstorm. We can't do this. Obviously, this isn't going to fly. So we downgraded it to premium, figuring, okay, everyone just gets free trading ability if they already have premium tabs, which honestly most players do. So we were already making a large concession here, and it somewhat took us as a surprise when there was the community outcry about it. And we understand why, of course, because
that's the sort of thing that's not obvious to the community, right?
I mean, it's the internet. People are going to cry. Give them anything, they'll find a way to cry about it. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah, it's just that when we're making decisions about what features to implement, it being something that we can, that helps with supporter packs, or helps with mystery boxes, or helps with new microtransactions, or in this case, the sale of sash tabs, really makes it a lot easier to justify. We have some private investors. They want to make sure that we're working on the right things. And this doesn't mean we're going to focus monetization in the future necessarily, but us being able to get trade improvements in is really useful, that it helps actually pay for itself in the process.
Well, I appreciate you tackling this topic, which, could be an easy topic to avoid, I think, for many developers. So frankly, and to have your guys kind of like honest opinions on it all. On the topic of monetization, have you guys considered? I feel like you could be doing a lot more. Like, why do you guys not, when you release a new skill, release an alternate art for it, even if it's like just a different color reskin or something like that?
Bingo.
Or why aren't you guys releasing MTXs with the meta? I feel like you could be making a butt ton more money on cosmetics that way.
Typically, the reason why we're not releasing new microtransactions with skills is that our development schedule runs to the line a bit, where we have, we finally got the skills finished, a week before they were needed for quality assurance, and there's no time to do micros because they're due in an expansion and the train of content rolls on and that kind of thing. It's mostly my bad project management internally that leads us to not have the right micros at the right time. We actually have a whole bunch of skill micros getting announced, like literally today or tomorrow or something. There's a whole bunch of them. So skill micros don't sell particularly well because they only
it
target
makes sense.
A particular
They're
niche.
so niche. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So if we do like a Bladefall skill micro, there's only a percentage of players. It's not anywhere more than 5% who are using that particular skill at once. So they do pay off in the long run, though, and that's why we try to release a whole bunch at once. We did the chaos damage ones, for example, earlier. And so we have a bunch of ones which I think are mostly, hopefully they're flavor of the month skills or a bunch of skills that are popular right now. And they'll be coming out in 222 this week, and I think there'll be videos of them in the news today or tomorrow, whenever we have them ready. But this is the case, again, where it's a matter of when they're ready, and these things can be very tricky to make, and there's so many moving parts. They have to be tested. We don't want them to cause particle lag. We have to make sure that they're better or, continuing to push the boundaries of our best skill effects we've made so far. They have to, go through this video is made, maybe the videos have to be translated, we have to prepare versions of these for the Garena servers. There's a lot of work that goes into making this stuff that makes it very difficult to time it with the exact flavor of the month moment. We've made skill micros and released them when the skill is unpopular because of, valid nerfs that happened between the point it was flavor of the month and the point the micro was released.
Yeah, that's a shame. I feel like there's like a lot of missed potential income for you guys that you could be making that that is totally good for you guys to be making that. It causes no issues or discussions or anything, right?
Yeah. It's just a matter of better planning, and we have got skills for future releases planned, and if we can get micros in for those, that'll be really good. But when we were looking at doing this set of skill micros, we said let's do the ones the players are using right now. Let's not skip those and start doing micros preemptively for ones the players aren't using yet.
Well, I have to say that I appreciate the idea that you guys are prioritizing the core game development rather than the MTXs. Though I try to take a longer term view of it, that money would eventually feed back in development, so it wouldn't bother me if you guys went the other way. But still, it's good to know that your priorities lie mostly in getting the skills out and focusing on those.
Yeah. Speaking of which, if there are any visual effects artists who do like skill effects and blood and explosions and stuff who want to apply for a job, contact me at chris@grindinggear.com. We need more visual effects artists.
Do it.
So,
got a question. Speaking of MTXs, and along the same line, we get these beautiful new skills coming out. Like Bladefall is awesome looking, and even Golden Bladefall. And then we look at Burning Arrow, Ice Shot, and Lightning Arrow, and it's like, okay, are we going to have any enhancements to some of the older skills you released with launch back in open beta, closed beta?
I'm not on the effects team, so I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I'd like to think that they have a precedent for continuing to improve old things. Now, of course, the community generally doesn't like it when we actually change old stuff. So, when we change auras, for example, and the charges, these are things people have complained about. So I foresee that if we change, say, Burning Arrow, there's going to be a set of people that doesn't like the new art. We've changed things like, for example, I believe that Lightning Arrow became much less graphically intensive at one point. We got complaints about that, but that was intended for performance reasons and also to make it look hopefully as cool as it can do.
All right, good information here. Let's skip ahead here to Ascendancy in the Labyrinth. So let's go with the Labyrinth first. I think the Labyrinth is something the community is more salty about than Ascendancy itself. I think Ascendancy is a massive success.
I would say the Labyrinth is extremely divisive.
Divisive? You always got to make the most neutral sounding. You always have to fix me,
I
Ziggy.
really like the Labyrinth, but I can totally see it. Like, it's also very fatiguing. Like, it's not something I can farm again and again, but I still really like it. But other people hate it, like, completely. So
I'm gonna
divisive is the right word.
All right, so I'm going to divisively, I don't even think I used that right, come out with a big swinging, like, the hard-hitting thing about Labyrinth, Chris. Low-life, CI, and hybrid builds get destroyed in the Labyrinth. Is there any plans to fix that at all in the future?
I talked to the team about this, and they made the following statements. They said, we're going to be fixing this. They said that the first thing is that energy shield protecting mana when you have Eldritch Battery active won't be counted towards your life total. So that means you won't take extra damage based on having energy shield protecting your mana. Secondly, they're looking into having energy shield have a ratio for how much life it counts towards when it's covering life. So this means that 1 point of energy shield won't count as 1 point of life for the trap damage calculations. There'll be some other ratio. Now the trick here is finding a right ratio, because some classes could do with a high one and some classes could do with a low one, and we're not going to differentiate, so we have to find something that works well. And their current timeline for this is 2.3.0.
All right, great. I mean, it's crazy. You literally take 4 times the damage and you can't even replenish it. It's like nuts. It's absolutely nuts.
Well, they're working hard on that at the moment.
Good. And then the next thing, trials. They're great for teaching people certain tools in the Labyrinth, but I feel like a lot of things we see in the trials don't even happen in Labyrinth. And half the traps in the Labyrinth aren't even in trials. And then they're just fatiguing as heck. What are your plans with the trials in the future?
So this is something that we have a 50-50 divide in the office, where half the people reckon we should make it so you do them once per league, and the other half think that we shouldn't make it once per league. And I honestly don't know what I believe here, right? My mind has changed 4 times. I definitely think that being player-friendly is a good thing, but on the other hand, it's not like we make the skill point quests once per league, right? It's content you have to go through, and cleaning up, like going and doing all the trials at once is time-consuming, but it's not that much time, and it does encourage you to explore the maps more fully, and something that prevents like direct playthroughs of these higher difficulties where you just like run in a line through crawl is probably a good thing. Anyway, there's a lot of discussion in the office. So the first thing we did was to do the fix-up for standards. We basically said to people, look, you don't have to do all these different labyrinths and all your different characters if you have existing standard characters, because there were guys with like 15 characters that they wanted to get 3 Ascendancy sets of points on. So that was fixed up for them, but this doesn't affect people in challenge leagues necessarily or new characters. So as it stands at the moment, we're erring in the direction of not changing it, but there's enough discussion that I wouldn't be surprised if that happens to change in the future.
It's the most fatiguing thing about rolling new characters in the challenge league at the moment, honestly, is knowing that I have to do 18 trials for each one. Like that on each new character. It's like the biggest. There's something about it. Like I get what you mean. Like it's to have these challenges to get these rewards makes sense, and you could just see it like mentally, and you could argue that it's just part of the challenge to get the Ascendancy rewards, which are very rewarding. Like the Ascendancy classes are insane. But at the same time, there's just something very fatiguing about it.
The way how I see it, Chris, is Cruel was kind of teased that it might disappear when Act 4 came out, but it didn't. And now we have 12 acts. And on top of those 12 acts, we have to do 6 trials and Labyrinth. So it's like, when do I finish my difficulty? Screw it, I'll just do it all at once. It's like one of those things where it's like, how much of the normal storyline do we have to do now before maps? So the game feels like there's 4.5 acts almost now.
Yeah, I understand the trials are certainly adding quite a lot to it, so we'll keep discussing it. There are some options here, but then the people who think we should keep it do have valid arguments. And these are it's one of those cases where, yes, for a user who's playing multiple characters and doing quite a lot of stuff, it's certainly quite a chore, but then there are valid reasons to keep it consistent and understandable for new players. Now, maybe the best thing to do is to find some advanced mode way of skipping the trials where you can like prove your worth somehow and not have to do them, in a much more time efficient way.
Like if I beat normal Azara 10 levels underleveled.
Nice. Well, it works a thing out, hopefully. It's just that it's not as trivial as just making these, per league.
So something about the Labyrinth then, on a similar sort of topic, is that the Labyrinth is quite divisive, right? And an idea has been thrown around that for people that hate the Labyrinth, running 3 full-length labyrinths as they're leveling is like painful, like pulling teeth, right? For people who love the Labyrinth, they farm the Labyrinth in Merciless. So the idea was then to create a nice balance between those two separate people. Was to have like a 1/3 length normal Labyrinth, a 2/3 length Cruel Labyrinth, and then a full length Merciless Labyrinth. So the people who are farming Labyrinth get the full length Labyrinth, but then the leveling experience, the Labyrinth's a shorter like tastes of. This would be a bit different for you guys. This would be a departure from it being the same each difficulty playthrough, but maybe that could be a good thing. I don't know. Have you guys thought about that idea at all?
Yeah, we had a bit of discussion about this. Basically, this team unanimously didn't want it to be shorter, and they made a couple of comments. The first one was that the average experience that a player has with the Labyrinth, because the average Path of Exile player gets to Brutus, right? Like, literally stops at Brutus because free-to-play players play 20 different games that week, and I played League of Legends for 1 minute, literally, so I'm just a random average free-to-play player. So the average free-to-play player gets to Brutus or not further. I mean, you look at Steam stats and it's 50% of accounts don't have that achievement or whatever. So the average Labyrinth player plays on normal, right? Very few Labyrinth players actually play on the higher difficulties because that's just what you get with these free games with the curve where millions of people try them out. And we wanted to provide a good experience in normal, and the correct Labyrinth experience is the proper length. We worry that providing a shorter one doesn't really, you lose all of the cool stuff where you affect the later stages of the Labyrinth. Having said that, the team is aware of the fact that it can be, if you don't like the Labyrinth, and having to do it 3 times is a bit of a chore. And if this were entirely side content with just the enchantments, then it could just be a thing that if you don't want to do it, you don't do it, like at Zeri or, those kind of things, entirely optional. But we have put Ascendancy classes in there. One thing that makes the labyrinth a lot easier, honestly, is just finding a Reddit post for today that shows the map, right? Like it makes it twice as easy to just say, oh, that's the way through. And there are Reddit posts for Merciless every day. If people start posting the normal and cruel ones, which is really helpful, like we have developers who are saying, I wish the community would post normal and cruel labyrinths each day, then it would solve this problem. I mean, there are other ways to do it. Maybe we make it so normal and cruel last longer than 1 day each, and that way it's easier for the community to post maps because it's lasting for 4 days or something. But
yeah, I mean, it's not like you're running them multiple days in succession, really. So that would be pretty reasonable, wouldn't it?
This may change this week when we turn the leaderboards on, where now there's suddenly a community goal to work out the shortest time each day, and people are going to be helping. It may be that the normal and cruel ones get a lot more documentation at that point because people are trying to, beat the crazy German guy that did it in 16 minutes today or whatever.
Are they going to be normal and cruel leaderboards? Like, is there a point to that?
So specifically there's a different unique jewel that you get for each of the difficulties. So this means that you can specialize in, you know what, I'm just going to be good at normal. I'm going to be good at cruel because no one else is playing it. And this is going to foster competition in those difficulties. And there are level caps. I don't have them offhand, but let's say it's 45. I mean, it might be 40 for normal. You want to make the best labyrinth running character possible that fits within that level cap so that you can play. And
that's
get,
that's like low-level dueling, but without the PvP. I like it.
Yes, and I've just realized that the experience gain in hardcore means you'll out-level yourself from the labyrinth and then your character won't work. Oh, I did not think of that.
Did you guys ever implement that recipe to de-level your character? Weren't you going to do that at some point?
We're going to have to.
Yeah, because you were talking about that a while back with low-level dueling.
I shouldn't be realizing this on the announcement of it. Anyway.
Well said.
Podcast is helping, I guess.
I mean, that's what we're here for.
Starting this week, people will get good rewards for running these. And I believe there are separate leaderboards for hardcore and standard, which is something we flip-flopped on in development, where we felt that we should make them the same to make it simpler, but we are separating them. So this means that old school hardcore, the one that the permanent league called hardcore that no one plays in, that one, where Crep has all the items, in that league, there will be rewards every day. So if you pick like Cruel in there, where there's 7 people who try it that day, you'll trivially get the jewel if you're good. And so this will encourage people to play these niche modes because everyone's got tons of hardcore wealth from races and so on. So why not use it to get those jewels?
That's a very good point. Let's talk about Ascendancy classes now. So Ascendancy classes, there's been some classes that have just said to be really, really underpowered, and some that have just been like really, really strong, such as the Champion, Permafortify, and the Slayer. I don't even know what the Slayer does anymore because I haven't even looked at it recently. Are there plans to be buffing any of the Ascendancy classes, adjusting them to, for instance, Slayer gets free melee splash, but melee splash that it gives for free is worse than the gem itself. And then Champion Permafortify is being used by almost everyone in hardcore. Are there going to be any changes to this in the future?
Yep. So I spoke to the team about this, and they have like a crack squad working on this kind of ascendancy balance stuff, because part of the scope of 2.3.0 includes some balance changes to this. And obviously we're trying not to get too heavy with nerfs because 2.3.0 isn't a full expansion. It's just a challenge league like Talisman, but the scope of it does include us fixing big problems with the ascendancy class balance. The first thing to note is that the usage stats that you see, like when people scrape the ladder and stuff, they're not the only factor. Popularity can be for reasons other than power. So, for example, the Guardian is a very powerful class that's good at what it does, but it's only designed for late game party support, right? Like, there's never going to be a situation where everyone in the realm is a Guardian, because that's silly, but it can still be doing exactly what it does incredibly well while having a small proportion of the player base using it. In addition, obviously, hardcore and astute standard players are skewed towards slightly more defensive classes. Something like Permafortify is popular for a reason. Even if it wasn't overpowered, it would probably still be a popular choice. So we never really wanted the balance between ascendancy classes to be strictly equal. So the Pathfinder wasn't intended to be as popular as the Deadeye. We kind of have the one intentionally unpopular but interesting choice out of each of the 3, which is the niche thing you can do if you want an exotic class. So the biggest problem we have is something like with the Champion, for example, where individual skills within the class aren't being taken as much. So when you look at the Champion, everyone's using Permafortify, but they're not using some of the other skills, and there's a huge lack of diversity within how people are building champions. So we want to make it so that all of the different choices within a class are equally appealing.
Yeah,
I have some.
When people pick champion, that's it. It's fortify or bust, and everything else is like I don't know what to choose. The other 4 pointers aren't even mentioned.
I thought the class was called Fortify.
Yeah, seriously,
Nice.
You have Fortify.
Well, with the Slayer versus the Champion example you gave, so obviously it comes down to this Fortitude node where you get the Fortify buff. Obviously that was intended to be popular, but people really, really liked it. And it's the unconditionality of it. The fact that you're taking something conditional and make it unconditional, that sounds really, really good. It's just a huge buff for this type of character. So we're planning, the issue here isn't so much that the Fortify itself is too powerful, but that the other skills just ramp up the always on Fortify. So our intention to fix this is not to take away that always Fortify, because people love that. That's the reason they're playing it. When we do balance here, we're going to attack the other nodes that make your Fortify better and get them down to a more reasonable level, so that you could choose potentially other builds that involve a champion rather than this one.
Good.
And the Slayer, the team feels it doesn't have enough successful mechanics, so they're planning to increase its damage, improve functionality of most of the skills that it has, and so on.
That's what we needed to hear. Speaking of Ascendancy, obviously with 2.2 coming out, you guys knew it was just going to be game balance is out the window. This is just an experiment league. We're all guinea pigs at this point. What is going to happen to monsters in the future now that you guys have enough data to see how the Ascendancy classes fit into the core of the game?
Interesting. Well, this is an interesting question. So there's something we're doing. I don't even know if I'm allowed to announce this. There's something we're doing to make monsters harder.
I think you're allowed to announce whatever you want, Chris.
People can still get antsy about me talking about stuff that's not locked in. One of the things we're experimenting with is to have it so that there are we have these think of them as like champion monsters that you can find in higher difficulties that go with packs and use more complicated skills. And so you're finding guys, they aren't bosses, they're just different base types with skills in the packs that make the fights quite a lot harder. So when you end up in Crawl, for example, you fresh off all the power creep that you got in Standard, you're actually fighting more impactful, complicated fights in Act 1, which makes up for the fact that Act 1 monsters are typically low AI, relatively slow, boring, simple monsters. And so we're, rather than numerically saying, let's make the game harder, turn all the damage up, and rep all the hardcore characters, we're trying to actually make the combat more engaging with the harder difficulties and the types of scenarios you encounter with monsters.
Yes,
so that's one of the things we're doing for monsters.
Exactly.
There will probably
that's
be
the
some
sort of
numeric
difficulty.
balance too.
That's the sort of difficulty mindset of scaling that I want to hear for sure. So you're talking like super rares, like another tier of monsters that are in regular packs. Yeah.
These guys, I'd have to check because I haven't actually checked them out in game myself. But my understanding is they're an alternate base type of monster. So they themselves are not necessarily super rare. It's just that they have skills that make the fight harder to do. Skills that complement what the existing base types of monsters are doing.
No. So you're taking some of what you learned from Warbands a bit and applying it to regular monsters.
Yeah, we'll see how it turns out. It's still heavily in testing. I mean, put it this way, this is the type of feature that, because it isn't announced until now, magically just doesn't happen if it was bad, right?
And then everyone rages.
Yes, so if it doesn't happen, it was because it was bad. All right, everyone, this is just potential possible.
Yeah, it's something the guys are trying. And I'd like to be transparent and say this is something they're trying. Maybe it works out badly. I think it'll probably be good. They've put a lot of effort into it. So it should be interesting. And I think that, I don't know what future patch it's scheduled for, probably 2.3.0. I mean, I'd be surprised if it was pushed to 2.4.0, but there'll be more information in the lead up to that release.
If you could pass this on, Warbands would have been much more of a success if the monsters weren't as tanky as they were and they did barely any damage. I mean, maybe in high-end maps the generals were scary, but Warbands, you found them all the time and they were so tanky. Please don't make these champion mobs ridiculously tanky because people just skip them. That's the only advice I have to give.
I think their only special thing is that they use interesting skills rather than, they're just white monsters still. They're just, kind of different white monsters. I could be wrong. They could have been turned into super rares by now, and that hasn't been communicated to me. But either way, we'll find out. I'll try to get more information on it to pass on to you guys and see how it's going. Or alternatively, the devs will be super angry at me talking about something that's not locked in yet. But again, it's just a transparency thing. This is the kind of thing we're trying to make it so that higher difficulties feel more impactful in an interesting tactical way rather than just a numeric cock block as it's been described before.
Honestly, that sounds like, I'm really glad to hear that, because it sounds like you guys are pushing these things in the ways that need to be for the game to continue to develop and push the action RPG genre in an interesting direction, rather than just adding more things that are already expected in action RPGs. That's very exciting. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how it turns out.
Definitely.
All right. So the next one I'll bring up, if you don't mind, Ziggy, is the Chaos meta. I feel like this is a very important thing to discuss. So the Chaos meta is really strong right now for a couple reasons. One, you got double dipping. Projectile damage, area damage, trap damage is all double dipping. Two, you have the Occultist minus 20% Chaos Pen is ridiculous. And most of all, map mods. There is not there's not very many map mods that chaos meta can't even tackle. Well, everybody else is worrying about elemental reflect as a physical build is extremely scary, yet chaos mods are like whatever, you know. Is there any kind of adjustment going to be happening to this chaos meta?
So we have this team internally called the Chaos Team, which I suspect they wanted as a name just because it's awesome. And hopefully they're going to fix chaos as part of it. It's intentional that chaos doesn't have the same drawbacks as other elements, right? We don't want to add chaos reflect. We don't want to add chaos map mods that change it. You know, this is because chaos is a different damage type. It's meant to be special. It's meant to be different. It's not just a fourth elemental type. So we're not just solving it by making it have the same penalties that regular damage types do. Having said that, it's still way too strong, right? This is a big problem. The guys aren't happy with it, and there are a lot of problems to solve. So we intended the chaos improvements to make skills that were fun to play. Like, we wanted it so that the new chaos skills were something that people could immediately jump on and have a great time. But then several problems occurred. The first one is the community's smarter than us, so they came up with better combos. And the second thing is Voltaxic Rift, which of course means everything's chaos now. So this is kind of strictly better. In addition, like, double dipping is something that the team aren't happy with in this case. I mean, my hardcore character died to double dipping from vulnerability and puncture. I know how painful it is, and in this case, it's causing the chaos stuff to be incredibly powerful. And they're looking into ways to prevent double dipping and then to balance appropriately. Like, at one stage, someone said to me, look, we may just double the damage of Ignite but prevent the double dipping. We may double what Poison does and then prevent the double dipping. So it's that type of thing there where they'd rather keep these powerful in their own way, but make it so that you don't have to rely on double dipping in order to do that, because this isn't intuitive for new players.
So something I want to touch on, the stance you guys took in 2.2 was you nerfed a lot of chaos uniques, but yet the meta still is there because as long as you get 100% chaos damage, you still have double dipping. And honestly, I feel that nerfing uniques is going to just make the meta either dead, or it's going to, like, well, if you nerf the uniques and nerf double dipping, chaos is going to get too much of a big setback. And if you nerf all the uniques, people are going to be really upset about it. So please don't go out of your way to nerf the items. Just instead nerf the mechanics.
Yeah, I understand. Changing items is something we try to avoid where possible. It hurts the players by either creating legacy ones or making it so their old items just aren't as good as the new ones, or whichever direction it goes in, it's a negative thing.
A little bit off topic here, Lightning Coil. It's like the only thing evasion builds have anymore, that especially melee evasion. Is there any looks into changing evasion at all, or Lightning Coil?
I have to talk to the team about it. It isn't something that's come up in the last week or so balanced discussion that I'm aware of, so I don't know what their current thoughts are.
Okay.
Typically, they bring me complete plans and stuff rather than the speculative stuff.
For a later date, Zeno, that's a point I'd like to argue with you, though.
I'm just so overcoiled. I'm so overcoiled. All right. Let's go back to Chaos Meta. Sorry for this shift there. Let's see. Chaos map mods. Is that something we may see in the future?
It's unlikely because we don't want to treat it just like another damage type. We like the idea that chaos is different to them.
Okay, fair enough.
So I think like my point of view on chaos has been that its idea was that it was weaker but safer and simpler and easier. Like, you didn't have to worry about map mods, you didn't have to worry about reflect, but you dealt less damage, and it was an interesting other way to tackle the game that was safer. Yeah. But now it's become very strong. So are you guys interested in taking it back to that point where it's a bit weaker than like elemental or physical or something like that, but still safer?
We like it feeling as a strong thing, but it needs its own drawbacks. Like a note that Rory made, I think he wanted me to read this out. We'll find out. He says, most of the mechanics that avoid reflected damage, like traps, don't get leech as a payoff. So maybe something we could do with chaos damage is to provide penalties to leech on map mods, just saying you can't leech chaos damage on certain maps. That way it's more similar to using something like traps to avoid reflect.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That's the sort of like, I like the idea of putting chaos reflect in the game. I think that would be a lame way of doing it, but that's a more interesting way of doing it. Yeah, I like that.
All right, so you want to kick off the self-found challenge, Ziggy? Community randomness?
Yeah, sure thing. So recently, the community's been doing this solo self-found challenge. This is a completely community-driven event. No doubt you've seen people doing that, yeah, Chris?
Yep.
Cool stuff. So I think it's shown we had well over 1,000 accounts sign up for that. Like way over 1,000 accounts. I don't know how many the number got to exactly, but lots of people participating in that, and lots of people playing it for a pretty decent amount of time as well. Like, you guys say like hardly anyone gets to Brutus. The number of people getting past Brutus is probably over 500 or so. So by that metric, by the Brutus metric. So I think this has shown like a desire for this style of content in the game, or an excitement about community-driven events. Have you guys thought about recircling back to the idea of things like custom leagues and adding support for stuff like that? That was something you talked about a very long time ago, but hasn't really been discussed in quite some time.
Yeah, we'd really like to add custom leagues. It's just that currently our challenge league and expansion schedule takes more and more of our time. We have, put it this way, we have a lot of challenge league and expansion stuff to do, and then simultaneously we have the community saying performance improvements. We retask a ton of people onto that, and then they're saying trade. So we do, and there's no custom leagues getting made during that, if you see what I mean. So were we to get another programmer to throw on custom leagues, we'd throw them on performance right now, and then maybe later trade. It's just a resource question, and that's something that, like, I'd like to think that this is a revenue generating thing, because we've talked about letting people make custom leagues for their guild for a small cost. Ideally, we can have stuff for the community. This isn't something like access to the game shouldn't be something that's gated behind money in this case. So there may be the way for people to pay for their own custom leagues, but it would be great for us to run a variety of ones for, maybe ones the community votes on that we run or something like that. Maybe this is something we can tie into how race seasons work, where we also tie in some kind of custom league that's competitive and that people are racing in it, but it's also got some interesting rules and so on.
I really like that idea. I totally understand something like custom leagues can't really be a development priority over stuff like improving performance and such. It's good to hear that you guys are considering it as like potential integration into races and stuff like that. I can see Rise QT in the chat especially is very excited. I quite like that idea for sure.
We maybe ought to manually try some custom leagues. Like, put it this way, I can set up a league in 30 seconds. If you guys say, look, I want a solo league and I want the Headhunter mod on it, it takes seconds to turn that on. The only problem is it's confusing for the player base that they're in the middle of playing a challenge league and then suddenly am I meant to play this thing now? What am I doing? Am I deleting my characters? So it's just a communication of focusing the attention of the community, and we're careful to not derail what the current goals of the community are.
Yeah, there's definitely a risk of splintering the community too, which is a pretty good argument against making custom leagues, I do admit, but still something I'm interested in you guys exploring, and glad to hear you're considering it for sure. If you don't mind, Zeno, in the past you guys mentioned the idea of like craftsmen's leagues being a bad idea because it sets player expectations. Now that you've kind of done that, I think with Perandus League, I could argue, is that something you guys are reconsidering now, that statement, on the idea of something like a craftsman league or events based on that, of like higher currency drop rates, self-found, things like that?
We are interested in running some craftsman-like events, but we'll probably treat it carefully and not have them as like a full challenge league or something. Maybe we run a 24-hour or 1 week or something like that at some stage.
That's what I think.
The player expectations things does still count. Once you've crafted in a craftsman league with currency everywhere, it's going to feel really underwhelming to craft in the main game, and that's something you keep forever. Just like if we completely drop the idea of easy access to uniques, then it's certainly going to feel a bit slow not finding a gold room by the time you get to maps, in the regular game. So we have to be careful with that. We have some interesting experiments in the future that we're planning, which aren't quite what you're expecting, that, tie into the idea of, there being a larger crafting component in challenge leagues. Can't talk about those yet, obviously, but that's interesting. In addition, I think the Russian Path of Exile realm run by Garena is doing a IIQ self-found competition thing in May. So if there are any community members who are super serious about like learning some Russian, then there's an interesting event going on for their May promotion.
Can't imagine my ping to Russia.
I was wondering a good reason to learn Russian. I better start now.
Yeah. Brush up with my Russian item names.
Oh man. The next thing I want to bring up is Leo, the master Leo, and maybe future masters that we've discussed on previous podcasts. But Leo is a PvP master, and PvP we kind of haven't heard about in a year and a half. Is Leo changing so we can level him up easier, or is PvP gonna? I don't know. What's the plan with Leo and PvP, Chris?
So, PvP was really big in Diablo 2, and like really big. And then we thought, hey, we're a bit like Diablo 2. We could do PvP. That'll be cool. And then both us and Diablo 3 implemented PvP stuff, and it honestly didn't really go very well, right? Like no one's really playing PvP in either game. There's a small community. And we were wondering what happened, right? These are the same players that were playing Diablo 2. Why don't they want to play PvP now? Is our game bad? Is it not good for PvP? But we did all the things. We have the items. We have, there's more skills to use. What's going on? And we've come to realize recently that a large amount of the player base that enjoy PvP in games like D2 has kind of moved on to League of Legends now. There are PvP top-down action games like Path of Exile, and they're called MOBAs. And so we've kind of come to an understanding that the future of Path of Exile probably isn't in PvP. Like, it'll be a fun thing. We're not removing support for it. But really, whenever we do anything to do with PvP, nothing happens, you know? We implemented dueling, we've implemented 1v1, 3v3, we've implemented all the tournament support, we've implemented capture the flag, and each time basically none of the players engage. The community message we get, like, they literally reply to the PvP post saying, please talk about normal news. You know, so we've basically been told players don't want PvP. They want strong PvE content. Now, I think there's a lot of scope for competitive PvE content, right? Like, for example, hypothetically, imagine some like massive dungeon that you compete in with another player where you want to kill the most monsters in the time, but killing the monsters is what you're doing rather than killing the other player.
Yes.
You know, there's certainly tons of competitive stuff we can do in the future. You know, lots of cool things, but the actual core experience of you getting in an arena and fighting another player is something that feels like a waste of development resources at this stage. We've done so many pushes. Like, I worry we've set the state of the game back by focusing on PvP several times in the past. So, Leo, what we're going to do is probably move him up the stairs to stand closer to the arena, because currently his current location is you see him when you get to town, because it's important you don't miss the PvP stuff.
Yeah, like, who's this
So Phil
guy?
will put him by the arena, you know, just off to the side slightly. And that's probably what we're doing with PvP in the near future, because we have to deliver more challenge leagues, more expansions, you know, more acts, performance improvements, trade improvements. You know, there's a big list we've already been given of stuff to do. So we're going to do that stuff.
Now,
Go ahead, Zeno.
Is there any way we can make it so we can level Leo? Because Leo has some of the best PvE mods, but you have to use PvP to get him. And it's like, I don't want to be bothered. Most of the community doesn't want to be bothered, and you usually just find a friend and you just duel him for it. Is there any way we can make leveling Leo easier?
That is a good point, where the emergent player behavior here involves not really playing PvP properly in order to get those. And so we're kind of encouraging players to do a song and dance around it to get the mods they want. I'll bring it up with the team. We'll have a talk about it. Maybe the best thing to do is to move those mods to another master or something like that. Or to, you know, give them PvP specific mods.
I have to say I'm a bit sad about like the PvP thing, but I'm really glad you guys are taking that stance and that mindset towards it. And I think the real future of action RPGs is competitive PvE. I think that's the biggest thing that this genre can offer uniquely to gamers that you can't get in very many other games. Whereas, like you said, other genres have taken the burden of a lot of the PvP player base from Diablo 2 and so on. So I'm really glad to hear you guys saying that.
Yeah, Leo is like something that I always want to get, you know, like avoid stun on helmets level 5. Anything past level 3 is just a chore, and it's so nice that you guys might move him to other mods and or make it easier to level him. Just something so that we can embrace these mods. What else do we have? Server issues and instabilities. You know, this league has been pretty crazy. You know, the Perandus mobs in general have just been extremely laggy and a lot of server crashing. Is there anything you'd like to touch up about this? I know you just recently released a development manifesto about it.
Yeah, I think most people have, like, it's surprising how many of my Reddit posts people have read in general, so they're pretty, you know, up to date on the status of it, but the Perandus mods being laggy wasn't at all a server thing. That was entirely due to lack of effect preloading on the client, because our development process until now didn't substantially, well, it didn't do all of the stuff it needed to do to make new features as fast as they should be. So this is something we've changed internally now, so when we're testing new content, we make sure that on slower machines and so on, there aren't preloading and stuttering problems related to it. So that's just a matter of us, you know, coming in a bit hot, landing that with, you know, one wing finished on the plane. So I wouldn't expect future content to have those issues. With regard to the servers themselves, the actual server machines are generally just fine. They've had some connectivity issues, which is frustrating for us, but at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to make sure that they have good connectivity. And so we've been doing some experiments with trying, like we've got our main master server in a different data center at the moment, run by the same company, but a physical location that's different. And that's been working well. We haven't had any server issues for a few days now. So we'd like to think that magically solved it and there was something haunted about the other one. Maybe bad hardware or a network card, or maybe there's a, you know, a switch that's plugged into that's faulty or something, and we can eventually diagnose that. But whatever it is that was happening every day isn't happening now that we've moved it. Now, for all we know, it could just randomly crash now and then we're back to the drawing board. But currently, optimistically, we believe that we've isolated what the problem was, or at least, you know, moved it to a place that doesn't have that problem. And then eventually we'll work out what it actually was and get that fixed.
Here's to hoping for that. So I think we're probably running you pretty late on your Monday duties now. So Closing out, I think, do you guys have a bit of a scope and plan for when 2.3 is coming and what's going to be in it? Are we getting another new act? Are we getting like new Challenge League and stuff? Anything you can say about it?
So we're trying to get a relatively predictable schedule with our releases, and we have actually announced the end of the Perandus Leagues being in late May. I think we mentioned that somewhere. So it's relatively predictable. 2.3.0 is probably going to drop in early June, though don't expect a release date for a little while. And at the moment, we're targeting to alternate sizes of our releases. So for example, Talisman was a small release. It did not have an expansion. It just had the Challenge League and some improvements. And then Ascendancy was a big release. It had a Challenge League and an expansion, as well as improvements. So 2.3.0 is another one of those releases that has a Challenge League and improvements, and then 2.4.0 has a Challenge League and an expansion, and then 2.5.0, which is the one in Christmas, has a Challenge League of the same scope as Talisman, and so on and so on. So we're alternating sizes here, which means that we get a roughly 6-month expansion schedule. Now, this could, of course, completely change. We might come up with some brilliant idea for a gigantic expansion and spend a bit longer on it, or we might have 2 quick expansions in a row, who knows. But what I can tell you is that 2.3.0 has a really, really compelling Challenge League and a lot of very cool improvements, so some of which even relate to Ascendancy that we haven't spoken about yet. So 2.3.0 is very cool. Its Challenge League is probably going to be the best one yet. It's got a lot of effort going into that one. In fact, nowadays, the scope of a Challenge League is way more work than an entire expansion in the past. So, for example, this next Challenge League is taking more development effort than Sacrifice of the Val took, and this is just a league. So there's a lot of work going into it, and I would expect you guys to start seeing announcements about that stuff in mid-May, probably. What else do you want to know?
Cool. Did I just hear something about it ties in with Ascendancy? Is that...
2.3.0 is still part of the Ascendancy series, so it has some improvements to the current Ascendancy content.
Okay.
Ooh.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay. I have some suspicions.
I mean, 2.5, you said Christmas, which is the 25th, 2.5. Was that a troll there, Chris, or are you being for real?
Oh, it's just that for the last few years, we've tried to release the Challenge League at the beginning of December, because that way, when it hits its stride, when people are taking some time off, it's good for player retention. It's a good thing. You can enjoy time with your family and having relatively new Path of Exile characters in a Challenge League. So we'd like to hit that here, and that's why 2.5 is roughly targeted at early December at the moment. But of course, the schedule can completely change. If one of these takes longer, well, we push stuff. So it's a rough schedule.
The last question we have, 2.2.2, do you have an estimated release date for that?
I'm currently targeting Wednesday, New Zealand time. Basically, the patch is built onto one of our testing servers and being tested, and I can't give you a release date until it's gone through testing, and then we'll know it's a day away or so. So our intention is to start promoting the features in 2.2.2, which, they're pretty predictable. There's a whole bunch of improvements. There's, the leaderboards for the Labyrinth that are finally ready, and we've got a whole bunch of microtransactions going in. We were going to release the currency stash tab improvements here, but we managed to get that one out early last week as it was all working. So 2.2.2 is kind of it's an update of all of the miscellaneous work that the team did since Ascendancy came out in terms of just the random fixes for stuff. So it's quite a miscellaneous change-heavy patch compared to most of the ones we've done.
And then the 75 enchants. I remembered we weren't sure if that was 2.2.2 or 2.3. A level 75 enchant.
Nice try.
We tried, guys.
Good try.
All right. Anyways, thank you very much, Chris, for coming on the podcast. This was a great episode. We really appreciate you coming by and doing these awesome community-driven type events. It means a lot to us.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It's really good to chat to you guys, and you had some really good questions. And if anyone has any more questions they need answers to, my email address is chris@grindinggear.com. I'm slow to reply to stuff at the moment, but I'll try to get answers out there if people have concerns about stuff. Otherwise, looking forward to being on this again in the future.
And where can people find Path of Exile? Any new players out there?
They should go to pathofexile.com if they've somehow listened to this entire podcast without having heard of the game before. That's really awesome. Check it out. It's free game, action RPG.
All right. Well, thank you again, Chris, for coming on. This is it. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks.
See you later.
Now we're just waiting on delay, so we could just kind of shoot this shit.
Waddle, waddle.
Well, thanks very much,
What did
guys.
the shit ever do to you, Zeno? Why are you shooting it?
I don't know.
That was very nicely. You tried to sneak in that question, Zeno.